A local state senator has a plan for curtailing animal testing in California. Joining us now is State Senator Scott Wiener. Thanks so much for being with us. Tell us about your bill.
Thank you for having me. So our legislation will end the practice of toxicity testing on dogs and cats, which is basically where when you take a product, let's say a pesticide, and just start shoving it down the animal's throat every day to see if the animal gets sick or dies. It's incredibly inhumane. These animals are basically kept in cages, and this is all they do, have products tested on them to see if it poisons them. There are other ways of doing it. It's really not that effective. What might be poisonous to a dog or cat doesn't necessarily correlate to what's poisonous to a human being. And so we'll end the practice in California.
Now, the Humane Society just released some images from a facility doing some testing in Indiana. So I want to point out this wasn't in California, but I want to show our viewers some of these images to give a picture of what we're talking about. And I do want to warn you, these are disturbing. Is this something that's common in California right now, Senator?
Well, those pictures are really disturbing. I can't speak to that exact kind of scenario, but this animal testing on this toxicity testing on dogs and cats does happen in California, and California should lead in moving away from this incredibly inhumane, just terrible practice.
So in some of these cases, they're actually force-feeding dogs either food or food that contains toxins that they're trying to get a little more information from, and if those would be safe for humans. What is your issue with that? If good information could come out of this?
Well, if this were the only way to do anything and people were going to die, that's something to consider. But there's more and more science showing that testing potentially poisonous material on dogs and cats doesn't really correlate well to human beings. And so we're talking about, it's really cruel. You'll have a dog that is kept in a cage, and every day pesticide will be shoved down the dog's throat just to see what happens to that dog. If it's poisoned, if it dies, and the dog may die, the dog may become permanently debilitated because of it. And honestly, it's not even that helpful in determining what's dangerous to humans. Dogs are different than people. And so, we're not even talking about life-saving medicine here. We're talking about products that we can test in other ways, and we don't need to harm these dogs and these cats. And so it's time to move away from it.
Right. So, for example, chocolate is toxic to dogs, but it's not toxic to humans, so it wouldn't necessarily produce the same results. So if there are other options of finding out if something is safe for humans, why don't you think they're being used more?
Well, sometimes in industry and in life, inertia sets in, and there's an attitude of, well, we've always done it this way, so we're just going to keep doing it this way. And I think sometimes government has to step in and say, you know what, this goes against our values. You need to do something else and shake it up a little bit. And that's what we're doing here.
This is the second time that you've introduced this bill. What happened to it last year?
So last year we moved it pretty far along in the process. Last year's bill also covered pharmaceuticals, drug testing. And we know that dogs in particular are used in drug testing for toxicity, not for effectiveness, but for whether the drugs are toxic. And again, the science increasingly shows that what's toxic to a dog isn't necessarily toxic to a human, and vice versa. And we know that the NIH and other agencies have recommended that pharmaceutical companies move away from toxicity testing of drugs on dogs. So we did include pharmaceuticals last year. That caused a lot of opposition from the pharmaceutical industry. And that's ultimately what tripped up the bill. So we are focusing on consumer products this year, not on pharmaceuticals. We want to get this enacted into law. We can focus on pharmaceuticals in the future.
And you kind of referred to this, California often leading the way and things like this, but what about the fact that a lot of these labs will just take their work to another state where it would be legal then?
Um, I don't see that happening. If they have operations in California, they're going to be able to test their products in other ways. As I mentioned, this approach is not scientifically required, and there's increasing evidence that it's not even that helpful. So I think what's more likely is that they'll test in different ways. They're not going to relocate their entire facilities just because of this law. And if the only purpose of their facility is to poison dogs, we don't want that in California.
Speaking of the dogs, a lot of the times I've heard that they use beagles because of their demeanor, that they're trusting, they're loving, and that you'd be able to perhaps get away with things a little more easily with that breed. And then we have a lack of pain mitigation measures. So there's some factors, it sounds like you're referring to, that are just sort of taking this over the line.
Yeah, I think for most people, if you see what's happening, it would turn your stomach. We should not be doing this to dogs or cats. We just shouldn't. There are other alternatives. This is not the only option, and it's just not something that we should accept in California.
All right, Senator Scott Wiener, we will continue to follow this bill in the Senate. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.